It's strange how silence in Hollywood can be louder than applause. One day, your name echoes through studio corridors, glowing across marquee lights. The next, your calls go unanswered. Your emails bounce. And suddenly, you're a ghost in the city you once called your kingdom. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. That's the silence Meghan Markle woke up to. For years, she had chased one dream: to be taken seriously as an actress again. Not as a duchess, not as a scandal, not as a symbol, just as Meghan. But Hollywood, the same world that once lifted her, had quietly made up its mind. And the man at the center of that decision, Jason Orley, director of Amazon MGM's close personal friends, had become the gatekeeper to her last chance. So how did Meghan Markle, the woman who once walked red carpets with confidence and waved from palace balconies with royalty, end up blacklisted by one of the industry's rising filmmakers? How did the actress who once outshone her castmates on Suits become the name whispered in boardrooms as unhireable? Tonight, we pull back the velvet curtain. Because the story isn't just about rejection, it's about betrayal, ego, and a single phone call that changed everything. It began, ironically, with hope. In the spring of 2024, Meghan had begun pitching herself again, not through agents or managers, but directly. She'd reached out to producers, creative directors, and even Netflix contacts who once promised her a second act. After the Spotify fallout, after the Netflix disappointment, she needed a win. And she believed close personal friends could be it. The film, written and directed by Jason Orley, known for his blend of comedy and emotional realism, was a quiet character study about ambition, loyalty, and the cost of fame. To Meghan, it wasn't just another movie. It was a mirror. She saw herself in the script, a woman misunderstood, striving for connection in a cynical world. So she wanted the lead role, desperately. And desperation has a scent in Hollywood. People can smell it before you even walk into the room. Behind the scenes, insiders claim Meghan's PR team began floating interest stories to entertainment outlets. Anonymous sources whispered that she was in talks for a major MGM project, a calculated leak to build buzz. But there was one problem. Jason Orley hadn't even met her yet. That's where things began to unravel. Imagine being a director known for collaboration, for genuine connection with actors, suddenly finding your private casting process splashed across tabloids with headlines like Meghan Markle returns to Hollywood with Amazon MGM film. It wasn't strategy, it was sabotage. For Jason Orley, this wasn't a publicity boost. It was a red flag. He'd worked hard to earn his credibility, carefully curating an image as the anti-Hollywood filmmaker. Authentic, understated, loyal to his cast and crew. And now this? A royal headline hijacking his quiet film before it even started shooting? That's when the first studio meeting turned tense. One executive leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Jason, are you sure about her?" He shook his head. "She's not cast." "Then why does it look like she is?" That question hung in the air like cigarette smoke. Hollywood has a long memory, and Meghan's reputation wasn't built on patience. Crew members from past productions described her as demanding, image-driven, always in performance mode. It wasn't that she lacked talent, it was that she lacked trust. And in Jason's world, trust was everything. But Meghan didn't see it that way. To her, the rumors weren't harmful, they were helpful. She believed visibility created opportunity. That if she stayed in the headlines, she'd stay relevant. After all, wasn't that how she'd conquered the palace? By shaping her own narrative before anyone else could? Except in Hollywood, controlling the narrative doesn't guarantee control of the outcome. Because while Meghan's PR team spun stories, Jason Orley was quietly making calls. He reached out to producers, other directors, casting agents, people he respected. He didn't ask for gossip. He asked for honesty. And what he heard back made his decision clear. She's unpredictable. She doesn't take direction. She brings drama. The problem wasn't just reputation, it was risk. Amazon MGM, now under massive restructuring pressure, couldn't afford a public controversy on set. And Jason Orley, who had recently come off the success of a smaller but acclaimed comedy, wasn't about to jeopardize his rising career. Still, Meghan persisted. According to insiders, she personally reached out through mutual acquaintances, asking for a coffee meeting with Jason. She wanted to tell her side, to explain. But Jason didn't respond. And that silence, that deliberate lack of acknowledgement, was what hurt the most. For someone like Meghan, whose identity thrived on validation, rejection wasn't just professional. It was existential. She saw every closed door as an act of defiance against her entire narrative: the self-made woman, the survivor, the fighter. So, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Her team arranged a casual leak to Variety, claiming she was attached to the project, implying discussions were underway. Within hours, entertainment blogs picked it up. The story spread fast. Meghan Markle returning to acting after royal life, starring in a Jason Orley directed drama at Amazon MGM. And somewhere in Los Angeles, Jason Orley's phone started ringing. Executives wanted clarification. Agents wanted statements. Publicists wanted approval. And Jason wanted one thing: to know who authorized it. That's when he realized it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was manipulation. Because the call logs, the messages, the timeline, it all pointed to Meghan's side. And Hollywood doesn't forgive manipulation easily. In the following days, Jason made a quiet but decisive move. He told Amazon MGM leadership he would not, under any circumstance, work with Meghan Markle. No meetings, no discussions, no callbacks. It was over before it even began. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Because Meghan didn't find out directly. She found out the way most fallen stars do, through silence. Her team's follow-ups were met with scheduling delays. Her agent's calls were missed. Emails got polite, vague replies. Until, one day, even those stopped coming. And that's when she realized she had been quietly blacklisted. Not through a press release. Not through scandal headlines. Just omission. That's how Hollywood ends careers. Not with fury, but with forgetfulness. They don't erase your name. They just stop mentioning it. And Meghan, who had built an empire on visibility, was facing her worst nightmare: invisibility. She tried again. She reached out to smaller productions, streaming pilots, even indie directors. Some were polite. Some never replied. And one, according to reports, said the quiet part out loud: "We can't afford her baggage." For someone once worshipped by the media, that word, baggage, was brutal. Because baggage is the opposite of what she sold. She'd branded herself as fresh, fearless, forward-thinking. But in 2025, that image was collapsing. And Hollywood, ever the opportunist, had moved on to its next story. Now, here's the part most people don't know. This wasn't just about one film. Jason Orley's influence runs deep, not in headlines, but in relationships. Writers, producers, actors, they trust his instincts. So when he quietly voiced his decision, others listened. Suddenly, Meghan's name began to vanish from casting lists. Her team noticed patterns: auditions canceled, meetings postponed indefinitely, projects suddenly going in another direction. That's when the panic set in. She called old friends. Some didn't answer. She messaged contacts she hadn't spoken to in years. And when one finally replied, it was with a sentence she couldn't forget: "They're saying you're difficult again." Again. That word stung more than any rejection. Because she'd spent years trying to rewrite her story, to prove she wasn't the person the tabloids portrayed. But now, the industry she'd hoped would redeem her was repeating the same chorus. The irony? Meghan had once believed leaving the royal family would give her freedom. But Hollywood was proving to be just another palace, with its own invisible hierarchies, its own rules, its own version of exile. And Jason Orley? He became the symbol of that exile. He never spoke publicly about it. He didn't need to. Because in Hollywood, your silence speaks louder than your statement. Yet behind closed doors, insiders claim one meeting at Amazon MGM sealed the decision. It was brief, almost casual. A senior executive asked, "So, Meghan Markle?" Jason looked up and simply said, "Not for my film. Not now. Not ever." And that was it. The verdict. A quiet execution of a Hollywood dream. But what Meghan did next surprised everyone. She wasn't going to disappear without a fight. If the system wouldn't let her back in through the front door, she was prepared to climb in through the window. She started making calls of her own, to producers, journalists, influencers. Some say she even contacted people close to Jason, trying to change the narrative, to turn the blacklist into a sympathy story. And for a brief moment, it worked. Until the truth began to surface. The emails, the PR leaks, the manipulation that triggered it all. By then, the damage was irreversible. Jason Orley had gone from silent observer to quiet executioner of her Hollywood comeback. And Meghan, for all her ambition and strategy, had miscalculated the one thing that could save her: humility. She had believed she could control the story again. But this time, Hollywood was telling its own version. The cameras had turned off. The spotlight had dimmed. And the applause was gone. But in the distance, something was brewing. A confrontation. A desperate act that would make Jason Orley pick up the phone one more time. Not to cast Meghan Markle, but to make a decision that would end her career for good. She couldn't sleep. It was 3:17 in the morning, Los Angeles time, and Meghan Markle was staring at the ceiling of her Montecito mansion. The faint glow from her phone screen illuminated the corner of her nightstand, filled with half-drunk water bottles, an unopened script, and a photo of her at her suit's premiere years ago. Back then, her smile looked effortless. Now, even her reflection felt rehearsed. To the outside world, Meghan had everything: the title, the mansion, the name that carried both reverence and ridicule. But inside, she felt restless, forgotten. She missed the sound of directors calling action. She missed stepping into other people's lives, pretending, performing, becoming. She told herself that leaving the royal family hadn't been an ending. It was supposed to be a beginning. But Hollywood didn't see her as a comeback story. It saw her as a headline. And headlines don't act. They sell. The irony burned. Meghan had traded the palace spotlight for one she thought she could control, but fame, she was learning, is never owned. It's rented. And rent in Hollywood is due every day. So she made a decision. She was going to act again. Not as a duchess, not as a documentary voiceover, but as an actress. A real one. Her team wasn't convinced. One of her advisors, a weary entertainment lawyer named Rich Dalton, had sighed heavily when she mentioned it. "You're not just another actress anymore, Meghan," he'd warned. "You're a brand. Casting directors don't want brands. They want blank canvases." But Meghan smiled politely, the same way she did when palace staff told her she couldn't wear certain colors near the Queen. She listened, then ignored him completely. In her mind, a comeback was inevitable. Hollywood loved redemption stories. And hers, she believed, would be legendary. So she began making calls. Quiet ones at first. An old Suits contact. A Netflix executive. A producer she'd once met at a charity gala. Each conversation started warmly, politely, and ended awkwardly. "Great to hear from you, Meghan," they'd say. Then the tone would shift. "Well, we'll see what comes up." Days turned into weeks, and nothing came up. Until one night, during a late Zoom call with her PR strategist, the name Jason Orley appeared. He was young, talented, and fresh off a successful Amazon MGM project that critics had hailed as a new voice in character-driven filmmaking. His next script, Close Personal Friends, was a delicate, emotionally charged story about ambition and betrayal among people who once trusted each other completely. The irony wasn't lost on her. "This," she said, gripping her coffee mug, "this is the one." Her strategist hesitated. "Jason's very selective. He writes what he feels, and he doesn't do celebrity casting. He's not the kind of director you can buy lunch with." Meghan tilted her head, smiling. Everyone has a weak spot. In her world, charm was currency, and she'd spent years perfecting it. She asked for the script. When she finally got a copy through a contact at Creative Artists Agency, she devoured it overnight. The story hit her like a mirror to the face. A woman adored by the public, but isolated behind her own ambition. A woman who believed she could manage every relationship like a performance. For Meghan, it wasn't just art, it was redemption wrapped in dialogue. She imagined herself on that set, walking through hazy lighting, giving emotionally raw monologues that would remind the world she could act. She called her PR team the next morning. "Give me that audition," she said. The message was simple and urgent. Behind the scenes, however, something was off. Hollywood agents whispered about her calls. Studio assistants exchanged glances when her name came up. Producers politely declined meetings. Jason Orley, meanwhile, was in New York, finalizing casting notes. When he first heard Meghan's name, he reportedly laughed, not mockingly, but with disbelief. "She wants to read for this?" he asked. "This isn't a comeback vehicle. It's a human story." Still, curiosity got the better of him. He agreed to review her materials. What he saw raised eyebrows: a self-produced demo reel shot in her living room, edited with cinematic transitions and a soft filter that felt more like a lifestyle brand than a performance. It wasn't that she couldn't act. It was that she couldn't stop acting. Jason jotted a note beside her name. Too polished. Too aware. And then he moved on. But Meghan wasn't someone who took silence as rejection. To her, silence was just the beginning of negotiation. Within days, she arranged for a stylist to send Jason's office a gift box, a subtle way to get her name back in his line of sight. Inside was a handwritten card. I've always believed storytelling can heal. I'd love to help tell yours. It was signed simply, M. Jason didn't respond. His assistant returned the package unopened. That, to Meghan, was the first insult. The second came a week later, when Variety published a list of rumored contenders for the lead role. Her name wasn't on it. But rather than discourage her, it lit a fire. She called Marcus Anderson, her longtime friend and rumored fixer. Marcus had connections in Hollywood's quiet corners, the places where introductions are made over cocktails and careers shift with a whisper. I need to meet him, Meghan said. Not formally, just a chat. Marcus nodded. Leave it to me. Within days, word reached Jason Orley's circle that Meghan Markle was asking around. Some shrugged it off. Others warned him to be careful. She'll find a way to make it about her. One studio exec told him. She always does. And that's where the tension began. The invisible tug-of-war between a director protecting his vision and a celebrity trying to rewrite hers. To Meghan, this wasn't manipulation. It was strategy. She believed that once Jason met her, he'd see what the world had missed. The woman beneath the headlines. The sincerity. The vulnerability. The actress she'd once been. But to Hollywood insiders, her persistence felt desperate. And desperation, in their world, was poison. When her PR team leaked to entertainment blogs that Meghan was in early talks to star in a major Amazon MGM project, the reaction was immediate and brutal. Executives called Jason in confusion. His casting team panicked. Even his producers sent a terse email. Did we approve this? Jason didn't answer. He didn't have to. He was furious. He'd never met Meghan, never spoken to her team, and suddenly his project, the one he'd spent years developing quietly, was being hijacked by royal headlines. That's when he made a decision of his own. He called Amazon MGM headquarters and told them, plainly, she's not part of this film, and she never will be. The studio supported him, but they also warned him, tread carefully. She's powerful in the press. Jason's reply was short, almost cold. So am I in the edit room. Meanwhile, Meghan didn't know what storm she'd triggered. To her, the leak was harmless. A nudge, a little spark to get people talking. But in Jason's world, it was betrayal before trust even began. He saw it as proof that Meghan wasn't coming back to act. She was coming back to control. And for him, that was the one thing he couldn't allow. Hollywood thrives on illusion, but it worships authenticity. And Jason Orley was known for it. For capturing moments that felt unscripted, human, flawed. Meghan was none of those things anymore. She was curated. Every word measured. Every appearance manicured. Every tear calculated. And that was her tragedy. The more she tried to prove she was real, the more artificial she seemed. When news broke that her name was being removed from consideration, her team was stunned. Meghan was livid. She accused the studio of favoritism, of bias, of being afraid of strong women. But behind the outrage was something else, fear. Because for the first time, she wasn't the one holding the microphone. And Jason Orley? He didn't just close the door, he bolted it. He began telling colleagues he wouldn't take meetings where her name was even mentioned. When asked in interviews about famous figures wanting roles, he smiled politely and said, I prefer working with people who let the work speak louder than the brand. To anyone listening, the message was clear. Meghan Markle was off the list. And not just his list. Everyone's. Still, in those early days, Meghan refused to believe it. She convinced herself that the rejection was temporary. That Jason would come around once he understood her intention. That she just needed one more chance to explain. Because in her mind, this was destiny. Every setback she'd endured, the press wars, the royal feud, the public skepticism, it was all leading here. To the one role that would silence her critics and remind the world who she was before the crown. But destiny, as Hollywood teaches you, doesn't return calls. And when Meghan finally realized that, it was too late. She'd already crossed the line from ambition to obsession. The walls of Hollywood studios have ears. They always have. Behind their soundproof panels and frosted glass meeting rooms, reputations rise and fall in whispers. Careers aren't destroyed in front of cameras. They vanish in conference rooms where no one ever takes notes. That's where Meghan Markle's name started to circulate again. But this time, it wasn't in excitement. It was in caution. Inside Amazon MGM's Los Angeles headquarters, the mood was tense. The words Meghan Markle appeared in an internal thread among executives, flagged not as an opportunity, but as a concern. Jason Orley had just filed a report. Not a formal one, but something more powerful in Hollywood, a statement of discomfort. Her involvement creates unnecessary publicity risk, he wrote. We need to protect the creative integrity of this project. It was the kind of message that could quietly kill a dream before it even began. You see, Jason wasn't like other directors. He wasn't dazzled by fame. He didn't chase A-listers to sell tickets. He built his career on something rare in this town, trust. And trust, to him, meant saying no even when everyone else said yes. The film Close Personal Friends had been his passion project, a story about loyalty, self-interest, and what happens when people blur the line between truth and performance. To Jason, casting Meghan Markle in a film about manipulation was like asking fire to play with gasoline. Meanwhile, outside those studio walls, Meghan had no idea how deep the resistance went. She still believed she was in control of her narrative. Her PR team kept feeding her fragments of encouragement. They're still considering. Jason hasn't decided yet. We're getting positive signals. But behind closed doors, those signals were red flags. In one meeting, a senior producer named Alyssa Cohen asked the room a question that summed up everyone's quiet fear. If she joins this project, are we making a movie or managing a circus? Jason didn't answer immediately. He leaned back, expression calm but cold. I make films about human beings, not headlines, he said finally. And right now, she's more headline than human. There was silence, then nods. That was all it took. The decision wasn't made in a fiery argument or a dramatic walkout. It was made in that quiet moment of consensus. But Hollywood is rarely quiet for long. A few days later, a junior assistant, young, eager, underpaid, overheard two executives discussing the issue in the break room. Jason's furious, one whispered. He said she's a PR nightmare waiting to happen. Within hours, the gossip hit its next stop, the press. Not through official channels, but through the invisible grapevine of entertainment insiders who make their living trading secrets for status. Soon, studio sources began hinting to entertainment blogs that creative differences had already derailed Meghan's potential comeback. One even said, Jason wants someone who can act without turning every shoot into a photo op. When Meghan's team saw those lines online, panic set in. She called her publicist immediately. Who leaked this? Who said that? Her publicist hesitated. It didn't come from us, Meghan. It came from inside. That word again, inside. It meant people she couldn't control. And nothing terrified Meghan more than losing control of the story. She had built her entire empire on narrative management. She knew how to turn victimhood into visibility, criticism into currency. But now, the story was writing itself, and she wasn't the author anymore. Meanwhile, at Amazon MGM, the executives had begun their own quiet damage control. They didn't want to offend Meghan directly. She still had connections, still commanded a loyal fan base. But they couldn't risk having her attached to a Jason Orley project. So they crafted a careful line for public consumption. We have immense respect for Meghan Markle's talent and look forward to finding the right collaboration in the future. It sounded friendly, polished, harmless. But in Hollywood language, it meant exactly the opposite. It meant, not now, not ever. Jason Orley, for his part, didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate his victory. He simply moved on. He called his casting director, told them to finalize another actress for the lead role, and made a note to block any future discussions involving Meghan. But Meghan couldn't move on. To her, rejection wasn't professional. It was personal. It wasn't just about a role. It was about validation. The woman who once stood on a palace balcony now felt like she was begging to get through a studio door. So she pushed harder. She sent more messages. She tried to arrange mutual introductions through friends of friends. Each one was met with polite deflections. Jason's unavailable. He's focusing on other candidates. We'll reach out soon. Weeks passed. Then came the moment that changed everything. An internal Amazon MGM scheduling memo was leaked online. It included casting call dates and attached talent. Next to the role Meghan had been pursuing were 2 words: final selection. Her name wasn't there. The news spread like wildfire. Entertainment outlets began framing it as a snub. Meghan Markle's acting return hit with Setback. One headline read. Another, Amazon MGM chooses rising star over former Duchess. The tone wasn't just dismissive. It was mocking. It was as if the industry that once treated her like a novelty had grown tired of the act. Back inside the studio, Jason was sitting in his office when a colleague walked in holding a tablet. "You've seen this?" she asked, showing him the headlines. Jason nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I didn't want it to end this way." "Then why not just let her audition?" she asked. He looked up. "Because sometimes the audition starts long before they enter the room." That line would later echo in conversations across the industry. A quiet commentary on how Meghan's image had auditioned before she ever did. In the weeks that followed, Jason and his team finalized casting. The actress they chose was a relative unknown, authentic, grounded, humble, everything Meghan used to be. When production officially began, Jason's only request was strict confidentiality. No leaks, no social media teasers, no unapproved press. The irony was painful. The very thing he'd feared from Meghan had been what solidified his rules moving forward. Meanwhile, Meghan's camp scrambled for damage control. Her team floated alternative stories to the press, suggesting she had turned down the project due to creative differences. They leaked new photos of her in meetings, supposedly reading scripts for multiple offers. But Hollywood insiders knew the truth. Those meetings weren't offers. They were courtesy calls. And creative differences was just code for "we don't want the drama." Still, Meghan refused to accept defeat. She started speaking privately about Jason Orley in interviews with friendly journalists. Never outright insults, just subtle jabs. "He's very protective of his projects," she'd say with a practiced smile. "I think some people are just afraid of strong female leads." It was a classic Meghan move. Turn the story into a moral battle. Frame rejection as bias. But that tactic only deepened her isolation. Because for every sympathetic fan who reposted her quotes, a dozen insiders rolled their eyes. They'd seen this movie before. And behind closed studio doors, Meghan Markle's name was being used as a cautionary tale. "She's what happens when PR runs the performance," one executive remarked. Even worse, Jason Orley didn't defend her. He didn't clarify. He didn't correct. He didn't engage. He let the silence grow. Because silence in Hollywood is more powerful than any press release. By June, the story had shifted completely. The world had moved on. Jason Orley was hailed for his new film. Meghan, once again, was the headline of a story she couldn't rewrite. But she wasn't done yet. Her publicist had one last idea, a direct appeal. A letter. Something heartfelt, handwritten, personal. They believed if Jason could just see her sincerity, if he could see that she wasn't the diva the industry painted her to be, maybe he'd reconsider. After all, everyone deserves a second chance, right? Except, in Hollywood, second chances come at a cost. And Meghan had already spent her last one. Still, she wrote the letter. Sitting at her kitchen island, pen trembling slightly, she began with her usual blend of elegance and vulnerability. "Dear Jason," she wrote, "I wanted to reach out personally. I understand how narratives can shape perceptions, and I respect the creative process deeply. I only wish we could have met. I believe we would have understood each other." It was the kind of letter meant to be sincere. But in its perfection, it read like a performance. When Jason received it through his assistant, he didn't even open it. He simply placed it in a folder marked Correspondence and returned to editing his film. That folder, insiders say, still sits in his office drawer, unopened. And Meghan never got a reply. But silence, again, was an answer, one that spoke louder than words ever could. Because by that point, the decision wasn't just about Jason Orley. It was about an industry quietly agreeing. Meghan Markle was no longer worth the risk. Still, she wasn't ready to admit that the curtain had closed. As the lights dimmed on her final hope, she was already plotting her next move, a more personal, more dangerous one. Because if Hollywood wouldn't open the door, She was ready to knock it down. Hollywood thrives on whispers. Not headlines. Not tabloids. Whispers. Quiet conversations in corners of conference rooms, back-of-house hallways, and over overpriced cappuccinos in studio cafeterias. One careless word can ripple across an entire industry. One leak can make a career or break it. And Meghan Markle was about to experience just how destructive a leak could be. It all started with a seemingly innocent confirmation. A friend of a friend, someone in her PR orbit, let slip to a small entertainment outlet that Meghan was in talks for the lead role in Jason Orley's close personal friends. The story was meant to be flattering, a subtle way to plant her name back into Hollywood's consciousness. But the moment those words went public, they became wildfire. Meghan Markle eyeing Amazon MGM comeback, read one headline. Ex-Duchess set to star in new Jason Orley film, read another. Within hours, the story had multiplied across gossip sites, blogs, and entertainment news portals. Jason Orley, still in New York editing a different project, heard about it from a friend on set. He didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He felt the kind of irritation that comes not from embarrassment, but from a threat. The threat of having your creative process hijacked by someone entirely outside it. For him, the leak wasn't just inconvenient. It was a breach. The film he had poured years into, a story about delicate human relationships and trust, suddenly became overshadowed by Meghan Markle's name. Journalists were calling his office, asking for comments. Social media lit up with speculation. People who hadn't heard of close personal friends a week ago suddenly felt compelled to weigh in, and every comment, every opinion, twisted the narrative into one about Meghan, not the story. For Meghan, the leak seemed perfect. It was exactly the attention she wanted. Every mention of her name online was a tiny victory, proof that the world still cared. Until the response started coming from the inside. Amazon MGM executives were alarmed. Internal emails flagged the story, questioning who had authorized the announcement. Jason Orley's assistant sent him a note. "This is getting out of hand. Should we address it?" He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he called his casting director, a woman named Sophia Lang. "We need to shut this down," he said calmly, but with an edge that made Sophia tense. "No meetings. No approvals. No exceptions. She's not part of the film." Sophia hesitated. "Even if she really wants it." Jason's reply was simple. Even if. The leak already changed everything. And he was right. By the time Meghan realized what was happening, her attempt to generate buzz had backfired spectacularly. The press didn't frame it as an actress exploring opportunities. They framed it as Markle attempting Hollywood comeback. Controversial. Phrases like PR stunt and image manipulation began appearing in comments on entertainment blogs. Twitter threads exploded, dissecting her motives, her history, her every move. Her own camp was scrambling to manage the fallout. Calls to journalists, clarifications, soft denials, nothing worked. Every attempt to control the narrative only drew more attention. Inside Amazon MGM, Jason Orley was making strategic moves to protect his film. He spoke privately with producers and studio executives. He wanted to ensure that the project could proceed without becoming the Meghan Markle drama everyone would talk about instead. "He's making the right call," one insider said. "She hasn't even auditioned yet, and already it's a circus." Jason's protecting the integrity of his work, and anyone who's worked with him knows that's non-negotiable. The more the press speculated, the more the studio tightened the reins. Internal memos instructed casting teams to avoid any discussions about Meghan Markle. Emails from executives politely declined any suggestions of her involvement. Social media posts were monitored to ensure no further leaks could fuel the story. But Meghan didn't know about any of this. To her, the world was still full of opportunity. She saw silence from the studio as a delay, not a denial. She sent emails. She made calls. She tried to schedule meetings. Every attempt met with vague excuses or polite deflection. Her desperation began to show. Sources inside her PR team reported that she was visibly frustrated, pacing her Montecito home, rereading scripts, imagining herself on set, trying to picture how she could convince Jason Orley to give her the role. The irony was brutal. Here was a woman who had once commanded global attention as a member of the royal family, now struggling to get a director to pick up the phone. She had gone from royalty to rumors, from palace balconies to conference room rejection, and the industry was quietly watching. Then came the moment that would mark the official end of her pursuit, the internal Amazon MGM memo. It was circulated quietly, sent only to key production personnel. Its tone was professional, almost sterile. After careful consideration, Meghan Markle will not be attached to close personal friends. Casting will proceed with alternative options. To an outsider, it looked harmless. But to Meghan, it was devastating. She didn't just read the words. She felt them echo in every room of her mansion. Her team tried to soften the blow. "It's just a draft," one publicist said. "She can still audition." But the damage was already done. Jason Orley had made his position clear, and the memo was just the formal documentation of it. The leak, in effect, had sealed her fate. In the days that followed, Meghan's attempts to generate momentum only made things worse. Insider reports suggested she tried to contact someone close to Jason, attempting to explain her perspective, to clarify her intentions. Those messages were politely ignored. Emails went unanswered. Phone calls went straight to voicemail. Meanwhile, the press coverage only intensified. Headlines framed it as a conflict between celebrity and artistry, between ambition and integrity. Commentary on social media painted Meghan as desperate and out of touch with reality, while Jason Orley was praised for protecting the film's vision. And through it all, Meghan's dream began to crumble. Every rumor she had seeded, every attempt to control the narrative, had turned against her. The story of her comeback had become a story of rejection. The worst part? Meghan didn't even realize that the leak itself had become the instrument of her downfall. In Hollywood, timing is everything. Jason's team had been quietly monitoring all mentions of the project, all press coverage, all social chatter. The moment the leak went public, the decision was irreversible. The narrative had shifted from potential actress to PR headache, and there was no turning back. By now, Meghan's internal frustration was palpable. Friends report she spent hours obsessing over the headlines, rereading the scripts, imagining herself in the role that was slipping away. She attempted one last strategy, a personal letter to Jason Orley, intended to humanize herself, to make him see past the headlines and understand her true intentions. But the letter, though heartfelt, would never reach its intended effect. Jason, seasoned and cautious, had already closed the door. The leak had created a ripple that extended far beyond her control, and now, Hollywood had spoken. It was more than rejection. It was a warning. And as Meghan prepared for the next move in her campaign to reclaim the role, she had no idea that this leak, this single moment of exposure, had changed everything. It had not only prevented her from working with Jason Orley, it had alerted the entire industry to her presence, her persistence, and her desperation. Her name, once a symbol of charm, elegance, and star power, was now synonymous with risk. For someone who had built her identity around control and perception, this was catastrophic. And yet, she refused to accept it. She wasn't going to fade quietly. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. There were no shouting matches, no slamming doors, no paparazzi flashes outside his office. For Jason Orley, Hollywood crises rarely required theatrics. They required precision, calm, control. But Meghan Markle had a way of testing limits. The first time Jason heard her name mentioned in relation to close personal friends, he chuckled, not out of amusement, but disbelief. A former duchess wanting the lead in his film? The same woman whose every move had become tabloid fodder, whose every word had been dissected publicly for years. It wasn't that he doubted her talent. Jason knew Meghan could act. He had watched her in Suits, had seen clips of her early performances. She had range, presence, charisma. But acting wasn't just skill, it was trust. And trust, for Jason, was earned on the set, in quiet rooms, in rehearsals where egos had no place. And Meghan brought the kind of notoriety that corroded trust before a single line was spoken. He received the leak about her involvement a week later. His inbox was filled with calls from executives asking for comment, a junior assistant nervously explaining that the media is buzzing, and a slew of gossip sites claiming Meghan was about to star in his movie. Jason read them all, slowly, carefully. Each headline was a little dagger. But it wasn't the headlines themselves that bothered him. It was the implication. Someone had inserted Meghan Markle into his story without his consent. And that someone wasn't an adversary or a rival. It was a potential actor, the very person who was supposed to be auditioning for his film. He made a phone call, the kind that's quiet but heavy with authority. "Bring me your notes on Meghan Markle," he told his casting director. Within minutes, Sophia Lane, his trusted collaborator, appeared in his office with a folder. Inside were audition tapes, PR clips, and press mentions. Jason flipped through them methodically. Every smile, every quote, every carefully curated appearance was laid bare. He stopped at a short montage of interviews she'd given over the past few months. In each, she presented herself as sincere, approachable, authentic. But as he watched, he noticed the pattern. Every movement, every word, every pause was polished, calculated, controlled. "This isn't an actress," he murmured to Sophia. "This is a brand." Sophia nodded, sensing the weight of the decision he was about to make. Jason leaned back. For a moment, he closed his eyes. He had come to Hollywood to make movies about people, raw, flawed, human. The kind of storytelling that demanded honesty, vulnerability, unpredictability. Meghan Markle, as impressive as she was on camera, represented none of that. Her public persona, meticulously engineered over years, was a barrier. She could be charming, she could be talented, but she couldn't be unpredictable. She couldn't be flawed. And without flaws, there was no drama. Without drama, there was no story. Jason's breaking point wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was clarity. He made the decision silently, professionally, definitively. Meghan Markle would not be part of close personal friends. He communicated it first to the studio quietly. Not in emails. Not in press releases. Just a phone call to the producer and a note to Amazon MGM executives. The language was simple, direct. "She's not attached. She will not be auditioning. Casting continues without her." That was all. No explanation needed. In Hollywood, explanations often become fodder for gossip. Silence, on the other hand, is a statement. And the studio understood. But what happened next was something Jason hadn't fully anticipated. The media had already latched onto the leaked rumors. Entertainment outlets, blogs, and social media accounts were buzzing. Meghan Markle in talks with Amazon MGM, read one headline. Ex-Duchess to star in Jason Orley film, read another. The story was spreading like wildfire. Executives called, seeking reassurance. "Are we handling this?" one asked. Jason simply replied, "Handle nothing. It's not our story." That response, calm and unflinching, set the tone. The studio could do little else. The narrative, fueled by Meghan's PR maneuvers, was already out of their control. Inside, Jason felt a strange mix of irritation and vindication. Irritation at being dragged into a media circus. Vindication because his instincts had been right. He didn't need a celebrity. He needed an actor who would immerse herself in the story, who would respect the work over the headlines. He began reinforcing his boundaries. Every assistant, every production manager, every casting agent received a clear directive. Meghan Markle was off limits. No calls, no meetings, no auditions. Hollywood whispers are powerful, and Jason knew that by setting this boundary, the ripple effect would extend far beyond his set. But Meghan didn't know about the internal measures. She continued to push, to reach out, to try to charm her way back in. Each attempt was met with polite deflections, the kind that sting far worse than outright rejection. At one point, a former co-star of hers tried to offer a friendly introduction to a member of Jason's team. It was rejected quietly. No explanation, no discussion, just an invisible wall. Every rejection chipped away at the narrative Meghan had built for herself, that she was unstoppable, untouchable, untamed. And yet, she persisted. In meetings with her PR strategist, Meghan remained focused on strategy, insisting that the leak to the media had worked in her favor. "They're talking about me," she said. "They can't ignore me." But Jason Orley wasn't talking. He wasn't ignoring her either. He was calculating, waiting, protecting his story, his cast, and his crew from a public spectacle disguised as ambition. The breaking point, then, wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was a quiet, deliberate act of professional defiance. A single phone call, a folder of notes, a memo marked "no involvement." Jason Orley had drawn the line. And in Hollywood, lines like that are almost impossible to cross again. By the time Meghan realized the depth of her isolation, it was too late. The leak had not only derailed her opportunity, it had broadcast her persistence as desperation. Her brand, once polished and untouchable, was now vulnerable. Her name, a powerful asset, was now considered a liability. And that realization hit harder than any official rejection. But Hollywood is rarely satisfied with subtlety. When the ripple of Jason's decision reached his inner circle and collaborators, the quiet exclusion turned into whispers of a blacklist. Industry contacts began to advise others, don't cast her. Too risky. The caution spread like wildfire. Even friends and allies who had supported her post-royalty began stepping back, fearing association with a potential controversy. What started as one director's boundary was rapidly becoming a systemic barrier. Meanwhile, Meghan began strategizing again. She believed she could charm her way back into consideration. She drafted letters, made calls, and even suggested joint meetings with producers. Every attempt, however, was met with polite refusal or outright silence. She didn't understand that the breaking point wasn't personal. It was professional. It was the quiet enforcement of an unspoken rule. Hollywood protects its narratives, and Jason Orley had spoken for it. Her next move, insiders claim, would test every boundary she had left to manipulate, charm, or negotiate her way in. And that move, as calculated as it might have seemed to her, would set the stage for one of the most talked-about controversies in her attempted Hollywood comeback. Because when Meghan decided to escalate, she was no longer negotiating with a director. She was challenging an entire industry's perception of her. And Jason Orley, unknowingly, was about to become the focal point of her campaign. The breaking point had been reached. In Hollywood, careers aren't destroyed by rejection letters. They are dismantled by whispers. The quiet conversations in hallways, the subtle warnings over coffee, the soft-spoken caution shared between trusted colleagues. Reputation isn't just about what's seen. It's about what's said when no one else is listening. And by the summer of 2024, Meghan Markle's name had become one of those whispers. It started subtly. An assistant in a casting office mentioned, almost offhand, that Meghan had inquired about close personal friends. Nothing alarming, just a simple note. But in Hollywood, nothing is ever truly simple. Those tiny sparks ignited conversations that escalated rapidly, the whisper network at work. Within days, the name Meghan Markle was floating from producer to casting director to studio exec. The narrative? She was difficult. She was controlling. She was a PR storm waiting to happen. It didn't matter that she hadn't even auditioned yet. The whisper network preemptively assessed her risk. For Meghan, this was invisible warfare. She couldn't see it. She couldn't hear it. And yet every rejection, every polite deflection was evidence of its power. Inside Amazon MGM, conversations about her became coded. Executives didn't openly declare, "We won't hire Meghan Markle." They didn't need to. A simple phrase in a meeting, "Let's consider other options," carried the weight of finality. Producers began avoiding sending scripts her way. Casting directors hesitated to even mention her in their notes. Every corridor chat, every coffee break conversation was filtered through the unspoken warning. She's not worth the risk. The whisper network is insidious because it's invisible. It's the kind of barrier you can't legally challenge. It's built on perception, reputation, and subtle social enforcement. One director hears a caution from a producer, a casting agent passes it along, and suddenly the advice becomes gospel. Before Meghan even knew it, she was quietly blacklisted. But Meghan didn't sit idly by. That wasn't her style. She believed she could leverage the network, charm her way in, and reverse the narrative. She reached out to old contacts, friends of friends, studio associates who had once admired her work, trying to gauge who might support her. Some responses were encouraging, vague. Others were polite deflections. A few, however, were telling. One former colleague, speaking under the condition of anonymity, said, "It's not her talent, it's the drama she brings. I wouldn't want to be associated with her on a set." Every setback fed into her frustration. Every whisper that made it back to her felt like betrayal. But the larger problem was systemic. The whisper network had already formed its consensus. She had been prejudged, and in Hollywood, prejudgment can be lethal. Meghan's PR team, sensing the growing peril, tried to intervene. They reached out to journalists, subtly planting stories of her professionalism, of her dedication, of her genuine passion for acting. But the whisper network moves faster than press releases. The studio executives, the casting agents, the producers, They had already formed their opinions. The narrative was set, and Jason Orley? He remained at the center of it. Not because he wielded public power, but because he had earned trust within that network. His quiet decision to block Meghan from the project became a signal, a warning. Others followed suit, reinforcing the idea that her involvement was a liability. Insiders claimed the Whisper network even reached other potential collaborators before Meghan could approach them. A director who had previously considered meeting with her received a subtle message. She's complicated. Maybe not the best fit for your project. Another producer, after hearing the buzz, said, "She'll bring attention, sure, but is that attention worth the risk?" To Meghan, these barriers were invisible but palpable. Every unanswered email, every canceled meeting, every polite rejection was a whisper made manifest. She was trapped in a web she couldn't see, a social network enforcing its judgment without ever needing to speak her name out loud. Despite it all, she tried to fight back. She doubled down on public appearances, interviews, and charitable work, attempting to reinforce her image as competent, kind, and approachable. She sent handwritten letters to potential allies, emphasizing collaboration, empathy, and passion for the craft. She believed that sincerity could cut through the gossip and the whispers. But the Whisper network is hard to penetrate. It doesn't respond to sincerity. It responds to perceived risk. And in this case, Meghan's history, her headlines, her PR strategies, her high-profile conflicts, had already created an imprint that the network couldn't ignore. One insider described the situation as a slow-motion collapse. "It's not one thing that blocked her," they said. "It's the accumulation of all the whispers, the illusions, the subtle judgments. They add up until there's nowhere left for her to go." Her isolation grew. She called friends, former collaborators, even agents she hadn't spoken to in years. Some tried to help, but most were hesitant, afraid of the subtle social cost of aligning themselves with her. In Hollywood, perception is everything, and the Whisper network had already set the tone. Meghan's reaction was predictable. She became more persistent. She escalated attempts to reach decision-makers. She tried to engineer media coverage that might counter the whispers, framing herself as a misunderstood talent, unfairly judged before she even had a chance. But the network adapted. Each move she made became another data point confirming the narrative. Her ambition, her tenacity, her desire to control the story, all interpreted as risk. Every friendly approach was reframed as manipulation. Every attempt at outreach became evidence for those already skeptical. And the network doesn't need to be centralized to be powerful. It functions as a web, each participant reinforcing the other. Once a whisper takes hold, it propagates through meetings, coffee breaks, lunches, even casual mentions in emails. By the time Meghan realized it, the network had formed a consensus. She was effectively invisible, not because she lacked fame, not because she lacked talent, but because Hollywood had collectively decided she was too volatile, too unpredictable, too high risk. By midsummer, casting opportunities evaporated. Projects she had been in preliminary talks with quietly moved on to other candidates. Even independent productions, usually hungry for names, began avoiding contact. The Whisper network had done its work. Meghan's frustration grew. Sources report that she began discussing the network openly with her closest advisors, trying to figure out a way to break it, to circumvent it. She explored alternative strategies, private meetings, personal appeals, subtle PR campaigns, but each effort only revealed the network's depth and cohesion. It was a system she couldn't see, a structure she couldn't control, and the irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent years crafting an image of control, of mastery over narratives, both in the royal spotlight and in Hollywood media. Yet here she was, being quietly shut out by invisible forces she couldn't influence, by whispers she couldn't hear until it was too late. That's the power of the Whisper network. It doesn't make noise. It doesn't generate headlines. It works silently, persistently, effectively. And for Meghan Markle, it became the single most formidable barrier to her Hollywood ambitions. By the time she realized the network's influence, it had already shaped the entire trajectory of her attempted comeback. Jason Orley's quiet decision had been amplified through a chain of professional respect, trust, and shared caution. Hollywood had collectively reinforced his choice, and Meghan's fate was sealed before she ever stepped onto the set. And yet, she wasn't done. Her next moves would not be subtle. They would not be quiet. They would force attention, provoke controversy, and push the Whisper network to respond. Because Meghan Markle doesn't fade quietly. Desperation has a peculiar effect on ambition. It sharpens it, refines it, and sometimes it blinds. By late summer 2024, Meghan Markle had reached that tipping point. Hollywood had quietly shut her out. Jason Orley had drawn his line in the sand, and the Whisper network had cemented her reputation as risky. But Meghan wasn't a woman who gave up easily. Her strategy was simple. In theory, if Hollywood wouldn't accept her, she would force their hand. She would take control, manipulate perception, and turn the narrative in her favor. It was classic Markle, calculated, relentless, and entirely public-facing. She started small. Subtle social media appearances, carefully timed interviews, and photo releases designed to evoke sympathy and admiration. Every post, every story, every snippet of charity work was strategically framed to remind Hollywood and the public that she was still relevant, still talented, and still desirable as a collaborator. But social media is a double-edged sword. Every attempt to regain control risked amplifying scrutiny. Sources inside her PR team described a chaotic pattern. Press releases sent 1 hour, media clarification issued the next, all while internal emails flagged potential backlash. They were walking a tightrope. One misstep could undo months of careful planning. Then came the boldest move, direct engagement with the industry insiders who had quietly turned against her. Meghan's team began orchestrating meetings with producers, assistant directors, and even actors connected to Jason Orley's projects. The goal was clear: to build a coalition of support within Hollywood, to create a buffer against the whispers, to remind decision-makers that she wasn't a liability, she was an asset. Some meetings were promising. A few producers nodded politely, expressing tentative interest. "We could explore something," they said, leaving just enough ambiguity to keep hope alive. Others, however, were less discreet. Honestly, one casting agent reportedly told a colleague after a brief call, "I'd rather avoid any association. Too complicated, too unpredictable." Her frustration grew, but so did her determination. Each polite refusal, each careful deflection, only fueled her resolve. If she had learned anything during her time in the spotlight, whether as a duchess or as an actress, it was that visibility was power. And if Hollywood wouldn't give her visibility voluntarily, she would manufacture it herself. One tactic involved subtle leaks. Not the kind that screamed attention-seeking, but calculated whispers planted in the right places. Entertainment journalists and insider blogs began receiving tips. "Meghan is considering roles that challenge her artistry," one anonymous note suggested. "She's studying scripts, preparing for her next move." The strategy was to shift the narrative from risk to potential, to show that Meghan was not only serious about her craft, but also ready to be an asset rather than a liability. It was audacious, and it had mixed results. Some in Hollywood admired the audacity. Others saw it as manipulative, reinforcing the very caution Jason Orley had already exercised. At home, Meghan worked tirelessly. Script notes covered her kitchen table. Acting exercises littered her living room. She rehearsed monologues, filmed self-taped auditions, and even reached out to acting coaches who had worked with some of the most respected performers in Hollywood. Every day was an attempt to prove her worth, to show that beneath the headlines, beneath the royal persona, she was still the actress who could carry a story. But the challenges were relentless. Reports suggest that even when she sent polished self-tapes to casting directors, the response was lukewarm at best. Some were polite, some didn't respond at all. And behind the scenes, Jason Orley's influence continued to ripple outward. The Whisper network he had inadvertently reinforced now actively worked against her. Any attempt to pitch her for roles in other projects was met with cautionary advice. "She's complicated. Approach carefully." This, however, did not deter her. Meghan shifted strategies. She began reaching out to independent filmmakers, offering to collaborate on small projects, short films, even charity-based productions. She believed that by demonstrating her versatility and commitment on a smaller scale, she could rebuild credibility and leverage it for bigger opportunities. Some projects tentatively agreed, but internal sources note that many partnerships fell apart quickly. Directors and producers reported that working with her required excessive attention to image management, frequent media approvals, and careful monitoring of on-set interactions, demands that made collaboration challenging. The culmination of her counterattack, however, came in the form of a direct approach to Jason Orley himself. Through a series of intermediaries, Meghan requested a private conversation, positioning it as an opportunity to explain herself, to humanize her intentions, and to appeal to his sense of fairness and artistry. Jason received the message calmly, but with a practiced skepticism. In his experience, the most persistent people often cause the most disruption. He had already formed an impression of Meghan based on the leak, the Whisper network, and her prior behavior, one of caution, of calculated maneuvering, and of a relentless focus on self-image. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he discussed it with his assistant and casting director. "If she calls," he said, "keep it professional. No promises. No meetings." Still, the request reached him. And when Meghan called, insiders say the conversation was polite but tense. She spoke with a mixture of vulnerability and calculated persuasion, emphasizing her commitment to craft, her desire to contribute to close personal friends, and her willingness to respect his vision. Jason listened. Calm, measured, non-committal. He did not promise a role. He did not offer an audition. He did not give reassurance. He simply noted her points, thanked her for her time, and ended the call. To Meghan, the call felt like progress. She had directly engaged, directly expressed her sincerity, and proven her persistence. But in reality, the call only reinforced Jason's perception of her as ambitious, capable, and perhaps too focused on narrative control. Her persistence, rather than proving dedication, amplified perceived risk. The counterattack, though audacious, had begun to backfire. Her relentless efforts to reclaim control inadvertently reinforced the very caution the Whisper network had spread. Each attempt to assert herself publicly or privately was interpreted as another signal of unpredictability. Despite this, Meghan pressed on. She arranged interviews where she highlighted her dedication to craft, shared insights from her acting journey, and subtly positioned herself as misunderstood by Hollywood insiders. The press coverage, carefully curated by her team, attempted to paint her as resilient and committed. But the Whisper network was resilient, too. Each article, each interview, was dissected by industry insiders who analyzed tone, intention, and subtext. Reports circulated that Jason Orley remained firm in his decision, not out of malice, but out of concern for his film and its delicate creative balance. Meghan's counterattack, in essence, had become a public demonstration of her ambition and determination. Yet it had also confirmed Hollywood's pre-existing doubts. Persistence, in this case, became a double-edged sword. By the time summer turned to fall, the consequences of her counterattack were clear. Opportunities had evaporated, alliances were strained, and the Whisper network had solidified its cautionary stance. And yet, Meghan wasn't finished. Sources indicate that she had already begun planning her next maneuver, a strategy that would escalate beyond press releases, interviews, and private calls. She intended to take direct action to force Hollywood's attention, leveraging relationships, media, and influence in a way that would leave insiders scrambling. The counterattack had set the stage for the next phase of the battle. A battle that